Good morning. My name is Barbara Payne, and I'm the worship associate today. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the North Hills. Whether you've been with this church a decade or more, or this is your first time visiting, we welcome you. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, we welcome you. Whatever your theological stance, we welcome you. Whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. Wherever you come from and whatever your journey has been, we welcome you. Newcomers and guests are always welcome to participate in any of our church activities. If you would like more information about our church or Unitarian Universalism, please talk to our minister, Reverend Jane Thickstun. You can find her contact information on our website. Please join us for coffee hour following the service. If you're joining from home, the Zoom link will be posted in the YouTube chat at the end of the service, or you can find it in the upper right-hand corner of our webpage. For those of you who may not want to appear on the live stream while in attendance today, we invite you to find a chair in the section of the room that is marked off camera. Again, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the North Hills. It is good to be together, in person and virtually.
Oh, greetings. Welcome, everybody. It is so good to be together again. And this week, in the face of the news from Kenosha in the face of the frustration and despair even that our nation can ever shake, it's white supremacy. It's always good to give thanks. All that we have is a gift from life. Our food, our relationships, our shelter from the cold. And when we give thanks, it's always good to be mindful of all people and notice those who are suffering and do what we can to ease suffering and change its causes. Today we give thanks and we explore suffering. We must always do both together so that our hearts are strong for the journey.
We light our chalice as a symbol of gratitude, as we celebrate the abundance of our lives together. In this sanctuary, we harvest bushels of strength for one another and offer our crop with the hands of compassion and generosity. In the authentic and gentle manner of our connections, we cultivate a simple sweetness to brighten our spirits. May we be grateful for the ways we nourish and uplift each other, for it is in the sharing of this hallowed time together that sustains us. Our opening hymn is number 67 in your hymnal. We sing now together, and the words will be on your screen.
So I can't wait until our kids are vaccinated and they can be back with us together in the sanctuary in the church. And we had hoped to hear from some today, but we didn't get enough to make a nice video montage. So I'm going to tell you a story. And this story has a lot of props that I'm getting out in a moment. Let's see. And it's it's a traditional story from the Iroquois, from the Anashtawan, I can't say it, Anabi. And the version that I'm using today actually comes from the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is an excellent book. I highly recommend it. And it has a log, which I'm going to put up here like that. I don't know if you can see it. It has a turtle. It has, this guy is acting in the role today of a muskrat. He has had a role as a mouse before. He's a very versatile actor. This is Sky Woman. So, Sky Woman, she fell like a maple seed, pirouetting on an autumn breeze. A column of light streamed from a hole in the sky world, marking her path where only darkness had been before. It took her a long time to fall. In fear, or maybe hope, she clutched a bundle tightly in her hand. That would be the hand you can't see because it fell off at some point. But just imagine it's there. Hurtling downward, she saw only dark water below. But in that emptiness, there were many eyes gazing up at that sudden shaft of light. There, they saw there a small object, a mere dust mote in the beam. And as it grew closer, they could see it was a woman, arms outstretched, long black hair billowing as she spiraled down toward them. The geese nodded at one another and rose together from the water in a wave of goose music. Oh, shoot. She felt the beat of their wings as they flew beneath to break her fall. Far from the only home she'd ever known, she caught her breath at the warm embrace of soft feathers as they gently carried her downward. And so it began. The geese could not hold the woman above the water for much longer, so they called a council to decide what to do. Resting on their wings, she saw them all gather. Loons, otters, swans, beavers, fish of all kinds. A great turtle floated in their midst and offered his back for her to rest on. Gratefully, she stepped from the goose wings onto the dome of his shell. And actually, other versions of this story do have a log floating in the water that some of the animals were on, as well as Sky Woman, who doesn't want to stand on her own there. So the others understood that she needed land for her home, and they discussed how they might serve her need. The deep divers among them had heard of mud at the bottom of the water and agreed to go find some. Loon dove first, but the distance was too far, and after a long while, he surfaced with nothing to show for his efforts. One by one, the other animals offered to help. Otter, beaver, sturgeon, but the depth and the pressures were too great for even the strongest of swimmers. They returned gasping for air with their heads ringing. Some did not return at all. Soon only little Muskrat was left, the weakest diver of all. He volunteered to go while the others looked on doubtfully. His small legs flailed as he worked his way downward, and he was gone for a very long time. They waited and waited for him to return, fearing the worst for their relative, and before long, a stream of bubbles rose with the small, limp body of the muskrat. He had given his life to aid this helpless human. But then the others noticed that His paw was tightly clenched, and when they opened it, there was a small handful of mud. Turtle said, "Here, put it on my back, and I will hold it." Sky Woman bent and spread the mud with her hands across the shell of the turtle. Moved by the extraordinary gifts of the animals, she sang in thanksgiving and then began to dance, her feet caressing the earth. The land grew as she danced her thanks from the dab of mud on Turtle's back until the whole earth was made. Not by Sky Woman alone, but from the alchemy of all the animals' gifts, coupled with her deep gratitude. Together, they formed what is known as Turtle Island, our home. And there are numerous native cultures who know of our home, the earth, as Turtle Island. You may have heard it yourselves. And so we thank the turtle. We thank the muskrat. We thank Sky Woman and all the creatures that go together to make our home. So, we have some joys and sorrows maybe today.
Good morning. I'm Susan Powers from the Lay Pastoral Care Team. During our service, we create this sacred space for sharing within our community. It's time to share significant life passages with the congregation so that you can be held in loving care. We did not have any submitted joys and sorrows this morning. So Lynn Richards will place one stone in the sand for all the joys and sorrows that exist in our hearts but remain unspoken today. The sand represents our congregation, supporting the sorrows and lifting up the joys. We especially think of everyone suffering directly or indirectly from this COVID-19 pandemic. Please read with me the words appearing on the screen, understanding that here includes all those watching. Let us hold in our circle of caring each person here. Let us hold in our hearts those who are unable to be here today. Let us hold in our memories those who have moved on. Let us comfort in knowing that we are not alone.
I invite you to join me now in the spirit of meditation or prayer. Please settle in a little more comfortably. Close your eyes if you wish. Allow your body to just relax into your sacred space. Meditation is by Reverend Laurel Littlejohn Gray. In the name of all that is complicated, may we enter this week gently. May we welcome all the guests that come to our table. The ambiguity of why bother this year, the joy of celebration and fresh-baked pie, the grief of the empty seat that can never be filled, the warmth of candles lit in the dark, the malaise of all that you've been told about how to feed your body, the hope of reconnection, of feeling filled for the first time in a long time, the fear of Is this safe enough? The loving bustle of ancestry and recipe and tradition, the horror of history and all the ways it lives on. May we welcome these guests at our table and all others who come needing a place to call home. There is good news. There is space here, plenty of grace to share in the name of all that is complicated. Let us pause for a few moments of silent reflection.
We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves than our world than they could have done alone. If you're here with us today in person, and you can take your offering to the basket in the back. If you're joining us virtually, you can make your offering by mailing a check to the church or going to the UUCNH.org website, finding the link in the upper right-hand corner that says Donate, and making a contribution equivalent to what you would be putting in the plate. The morning offering will now be given and most gratefully received. Please join me in saying the dedication of the offering. May these gifts and the work of our hands and hearts give power to all we stand for as a community of faith. This reading is excerpted from Reverend Mike Johnson's essay, Stolen Lands, Stolen Children, published in her book, Finding Our Way Home. In 1617, a few years before English settlers landed, an epidemic began to spread through the area that became southern New England. It likely came from British fishermen who had been fishing off the coast for decades. By 1620, 90 to 96% of the population had died. It decimated the tribes and left many of the villages empty. One of those villages was Patuxet. When the English settlers arrived in Plymouth Harbor, they found a cleared village with fields recently planted in corn. This was a big part of the reason they chose it for their settlement. All of the village's people had died from the epidemic, except for Tisquantum, who we know as Squanto. We never really hear the whole story about Squanto. We hear he taught the settlers how to plant corn and fish and hunt the local area. But how was it that he spoke English? Here's the story as told by James W. Lowen. As a boy, along with 4 Penobscots, he was probably stolen by a British captain in about 1605 and taken to England. There, he probably spent 9 years, 2 in the employ of a Plymouth merchant who later helped him arrange a passage back to Massachusetts. He was to enjoy home life for less than a year. In 1614, a British slave raider seized him and 24 fellow Indians and sold them into slavery in Malaga, Spain. Squanto escaped from slavery, made his way back to England, and in 1619 talked a ship captain into taking him along as a guide on the next trip to Cape Cod. Squanto walked to his home village only to make the horrifying discovery that he was the sole member of his village still alive. All the others had perished in the epidemic 2 years before. Perhaps this is why Tisquantum was willing to help the Plymouth colony, which had settled in his people's village. Or perhaps he was there to keep an eye on them. The settlers, too, lost half their people during the first hard winter. There were only 53 settlers who survived until the Harvest Festival that was later declared to be the first Thanksgiving. It was a brief moment of tentative peace. 1 generation later, the English settlers and the Wampanoag were at war. For many Native people in our time, the day called Thanksgiving has become a day of mourning for the hundreds of years of losses suffered by their people.
Grace, it's a beautiful concept, beautiful tune, beautiful voices. Thank you. There are so many things calling for our attention right now. So much to mourn and a few things to celebrate. The Rittenhouse verdict feels like a slap in the face of all that is good and decent. As a young vigilante who killed with an assault rifle unarmed people who were protesting an unjust killing of a black man, who just got acquitted of all charges. Also yesterday was Transgender Day of Remembrance, when we honor the memory of transgender people whose lives were lost in acts of anti-transgender violence. And there have been many, way too many. Meanwhile, the Arbery trial continues with a mostly white jury to decide the fate of Ahmaud Arbery, a young black man who was shot and killed while out running for exercise in Georgia. On the plus side, 2 men convicted in the 1965 murder of Malcolm X had their convictions reversed, complete with an apology for, quote, serious, unacceptable violations of the law and the public trust. It's over 50 years too late, but still something to celebrate. And after spending the past 20 years fighting for his life on death row, Julius Jones's death sentence was commuted hours before he was scheduled to be executed. Yet the judge pointedly denied any possibility of parole in spite of vast evidence suggesting Jones's innocence and against the recommendation of the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. And my planned topic for today as we approach the Thanksgiving holiday this Thursday lifts up another long injustice I am inviting us to understand and mourn together. UU Minister Elizabeth Call, in a piece called A Thanksgrieving Reflection, writes, "The United American Indians of New England have commemorated a national day of mourning every fourth Thursday in November since 1970. They write, Thanksgiving Day is a reminder of the genocide of millions of Native people, the theft of Native lands, and the relentless assault on Native culture. Participants in National Day of Mourning honor Native ancestors and the struggles of Native people to survive today. It is a day of remembrance and spiritual connection, as well as a protest of the racism and oppression which Native Americans continue to experience." Reverend Call continues, "It may be uncomfortable to hear this as you prepare for your Thanksgiving festivities. We celebrate Thanksgiving because gratitude is essential to human life, but grief is essential for healing our history of violence. It's really hard to be thankful and sorrowful at the same time. But this is life. Sometimes joy and sorrow come together. Sometimes joy and sorrow come together. Our challenge this week is to be thankful and joyful at the same time. Thankful and sorrowful at the same time. Thankful, sorrowful. To mourn the suffering that Europeans have brought to Native Americans, to mourn the continued suffering that our systems of white supremacy inflict on indigenous Black and brown people, while also at the same time being aware of all we have to be grateful for. A spirit of gratitude can fortify us to face the hard truths and can prepare us to do something to make things better. The reading from Mike Johnson, Barb just read earlier, tells the true story of the first Thanksgiving. One thing I've learned recently that I wasn't aware of before is how there had been Europeans along the coast of Massachusetts long prior to the Pilgrims' arrival, but they hadn't stayed to settle. They had just enough interaction with the native inhabitants to transmit their diseases, like smallpox, for instance, that the natives hadn't been exposed to before and that they then had no antibodies to fight them off. There were no vaccines then. So the epidemic swept through the population and wiped them out. They left behind villages complete with food stores that were a help to the Pilgrims when they came to settle. It was also helpful to the Pilgrims that previous Europeans had captured natives and sold them into slavery in Europe, and that one of these slaves in particular had returned with an ability to speak English. So, the occasion we're celebrating, that we've long called the first Thanksgiving, was made possible by the horrendous ways our European ancestors had already treated the native population on this continent. What few indigenous people were left were willing to help the settlers at first because they were comparatively few, because they were good, generous people, and because they had no idea how much worse they would be treated as the settlers kept coming with their guns and their white supremacist ideas. Of course, we Unitarian Universalists trace our line back to those original settlers of Massachusetts, and they were interested in making this new land theirs. Our interest in finding justice for the native tribes we displaced, killed, and looked down on has only come about very recently and way too late. As we look at the Unitarian Universalism's history during the Civil War era in particular, it is directly connected to the creation of a mythos supporting the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday and the historically inaccurate and harmful colonial narrative of the Pilgrims and the Indians. My mother had a set of cornhusk dolls that had their classic Pilgrims with their buckles on their hats and shoes, and then the Indian girl with their long black braids. In recent years, UUs, Unitarian Universalists, have made a commitment to reconsider the cultural and colonial foundations of this tradition in council and in relationship with First Nations and Indigenous communities. Someone recently created a timeline of UU relationships with Native American peoples and nations. It's posted at the Harvard Square Library website, and it shows how our forebears participated in the efforts to civilize and Christianize Native Americans from the earliest times. In 1909, President Taft, who was a Unitarian and a member of First Church in Cincinnati, Ohio, appointed American Unitarian Association President Samuel Atkins Elliott to the Board of Indian Commissioners. In that capacity, Elliott gave addresses such as his speech called "From the Scalping Knife to the Can Opener," which argued how only assimilation to white culture would save Native Americans from their own barbarism. Elliott believed that liberal Christianity was an appropriate vehicle for teaching Native character, saying, quote, "He must be first trained to strength of will and steadiness of purpose. He must become accustomed to participate in the life of a community which acts under moral ideas. End quote. The timeline, admittedly incomplete, then skips to 1970, when the UUA General Assembly made a resolution urging the support of indigenous organizations and opposing the continued exploitation of the Indians, Eskimos, and Aleuts. It also called for adequate repairs for past and present injustices perpetuated upon them, or perpetrated upon them. And I'm not sure what adequate reparations would be, short of giving them back the continent we stole from them. In any case, I doubt any reparations were made at all. And we made another resolution 5 years later after the massacre at the Pine Ridge Reservation. This one says that the UUA and its member churches and fellowships be urged to sponsor ongoing educational programs about leading to effective action concerning the plight of Native Americans, and urged each individual Unitarian Universalist to promote social justice for all Native Americans through contact with his and her political representatives at all levels of government. End of quote. Since then, there have been more resolutions, actions of immediate witness, and statements of conscience made by our national body at its annual General Assembly. Our UUA president has apologized for our mistreatment of the Ute people when the American Unitarian Association had management of reservations in Colorado. We have spoken out against the use of Native imagery and names for sports teams and their mascots. Many UUs joined the witness with the Sioux people at the Standing Rock Reservation in 2016 to protest the pipeline. Most recently, and most relevant today, the General Assembly delegates in 2016 passed a resolution in anticipation of the 400th anniversary in 2020 of the arrival of the Mayflower in Plymouth Harbor. The resolution lays out many recommendations, culminating in a call for us to enter into dialogue with the local people, Native people in our areas, about the Thanksgiving holiday and its history, and asking for a time of truth and reconciliation for all Americans, including Native people. The latest attempt to expand awareness and compassion for Native issues in Unitarian Universalism and in other liberal organizations is to begin meetings with a Land Acknowledgement. This is a statement that identifies the tribes who inhabited the particular piece of land before whites pushed them off of it. And in researching who the tribe or tribes were that inhabited the land this church now occupies, and in pursuing education on Native issues in general, I learned that the Land Acknowledgement shouldn't be the first step. Adrian Keene, a Native American academic, writer, and activist who gave a talk I attended on Zoom recently, says that in order to avoid it just becoming another checkbox that doesn't have a lot of content, we need to establish a relationship with the Native people who still live here. So I found the local community called the Council of Three Rivers American Indian Center. On their website, they list a couple of people to contact about Land Acknowledgement. So I emailed and followed up with a phone call, and I had a delightful chat with Miguel Saku, who has a relationship with First Unitarian Church in Shadyside, as it turns out. He offered to come do a service with me about the Land Acknowledgement. We have arranged for him to come in January, and I look forward to our congregation perhaps developing a relationship with the local Native community. So I had been hoping to do the Land Acknowledgement for the first time today in honor of this service, but now I'm going to wait because he's going to do something that makes it more meaningful for us in January. Once again, our challenge this week is to be thankful and sorrowful at the same time. May our gratitude for the beauty of this world and all the good things in our life help us to handle the grief that is inevitable when we face the great sorrows in our world today. In closing, I want to share this prayer that my colleague Peggy Clark composed in response to the Rittenhouse verdict. I think it speaks to all the violence and trauma we are grieving here today. May we find our power in our grieving, in our conviction, in our sorrow, our strength, in our anguish. Today, we are not defeated, even as our hearts are broken yet again. We are instead reminded that the road to justice is rocky and unbalanced, but we are traveling it together. May our prayer find all the families who mourn. May our solidarity become a blanket of compassion in hope that the new world is only just beyond our sight. In the name of all that is holy, we pray. Amen. And our closing hymn is All Creatures of the Earth and Sky. It's number 203 in the Gray Hymn Book, and the words will be on our screens. I close. You may be seated if you like, and I invite you to sit through the postlude as well. So I close with these beloved classic words by Fred Gillis. May the love that overcomes all differences, that heals all wounds, that puts to flight all fears, that reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. Oh, so may it be so, and go in peace.
John, I'll get to your basket. Oh, okay. No. Well, you know, we actually went out developed a piano. Thursday night, during half but you know, they've got a decent they're in the bar. There were 3 tables that might have been filled. Just enough. As opposed to say, like, trying to plan going to this bar and not something and low ceiling and everything like that.
You already taken the money?
We did get our boosters. So the team is in Jay's like, oh, what's the yes. So we were well protected. We were going to actually be up in the piano. I was supposed to be able to see been having fun running around the country then, man.
What's that?
You've been having fun running around the country.
Not really. I mean,
You took a trip out there.
we did go out west. It was great.
It sounded like
Yeah, she's goes solo. I'm not on Facebook, so I forget that all that stuff gets disseminated.
yeah. I'm not on Facebook either, but can't do it for some reason.
I think I'd just be probably spend too much time on it.
I don't know. I tried it when Tony had her hip replaced. I was when I started. It wasn't sustainable.
Just get on and look and don't bother posting it. Just keep after it.
I've got 2 years with that. I never posted a thing.
Yeah.
All right. Good to see you. Have a great Thanksgiving.
You too, man.
See any kids or anything?
My son's coming home.
Is he?
Yeah. So he'll be home for a couple of days.
Enjoy.